You are listening to the Mindset Forge podcast, and I'm Barton Bryan. I'm your host, and I'm taking you in a new direction. So if you're listening to this and you maybe don't resonate with this new topic or this new focus, then I just want to honor you, thank you, and appreciate the fact that you were a listener and may continue to still listen because you might be interested in this topic, but it may not specifically be directed at you. And for that, I want to honor you for being a devoted listener. But my focus right now, season 5, is really digging deep with supporting men between the ages of 40 and 60. Now, if you're younger than that, if you're older than that, or if you have maybe a husband or a brother who's that age, this may also interest you because I think it's really going to nail down some of the really key topics and challenges that are part of this time in our lives. As a 48-year-old man, I'm experiencing kind of the understanding, there's so many things happening at this age as our bodies get older, and kind of focuses changes, my life purpose, the direction, all the things that I've been thinking about and striving for years. Some of those things don't make a lot of sense to me anymore. They're not working. And so I want to talk about that stuff, and I really want to help two groups of people. You might be somebody who's currently working with me. As a coach, I'm working with people all over the country, doing personal training also, but I'm helping people traverse this landscape, which is middle age. And so that might be who you are, but it also could be just somebody who's interested in the topic. You're listening, you may be on a drive to work or something like that, and it interests you because it's something you're going through, or maybe a family member, a loved one is going through something like this, and you're interested in the topic. So that's kind of just setting the stage. And let's, be 100% clear, like growing old's hard, right? It's not for the weak of heart, right? It's just, no matter what you do, no matter how much you, do the right things, eat the right food, be as healthy as you can, your body is slowly but surely, just getting slightly older all the time, and therefore potentially weaker or just less adept at all the things that you took for granted when you were 20, 30, and maybe even, early 40s. I noticed this decline slightly. It wasn't really until I was 44, 45 that I really started to see it and understand that I needed to really, adapt to this new situation and create, much more proactive, much more discipline around being healthy, being, driven and disciplined in the right ways, so that I could be a great dad, a great husband, a member of this community of Austin, Texas, which is an incredible place to live, and serve people best I could. And it's just been an honor, especially in the last 5 years. I train a lot of men and women, but specifically men in that kind of 40 to 60-year-old range. And I'm working with them not just on getting stronger, not just on losing weight, kind of the basics of fitness, but also of understanding the deeper questions and the deeper challenges that happen at this age. Looking at blood work, looking at not just body fat, but can we improve our strength? Can we improve our coordination, mobility, those types of things? So in that one-on-one in-person setting, it's kind of a laboratory, and so I get to do a lot of that, but I'm also enjoying the coaching part of it too. So as I explain what's going on here and in the direction I want to take you as a listener, I want to start by saying the point of today in this episode is not to throw a whole bunch of ideas at you that you're just it's too much and it's kind of overwhelming, but I want you to actually do something very specific when you listen to this. And so as you're driving in a car, or maybe you're walking and you got your earphones on, you're listening to this podcast, whenever it's over, or maybe you stop it halfway through once you kind of get the idea, and you do it right then and there. And that is, I want you to tell your story out loud. Now, nobody has to hear it, but you got to record it. Pull out your phone, go to voice memo, and just hit record and tell your story. It doesn't matter how long it is. It could be 30 minutes long, it could be an hour long, it could be 5 minutes. That's not important. The important part is finding the beats, finding those moments of your life that kind of weave the story of your life up until today. It's so important for you to see it and tell the story in a way that shows the purpose of why you are who you are today. Whether you feel great about who you are today or not, like start from back in the beginning. Start when you were a kid and you can those early memories, work your way through junior high, high school, the struggles, the trials, the tribulations, the mistakes, the failures, the successes, the amazing trips, or vacations that change your perspective, the first girlfriend. Talk about it all and really get comfortable with your story. Now, you never have to share this with anyone if you don't want to. And if you do want to, you can share it with me if you'd want. If you want to email me, you can get my email address from the website. Send me the email. If you really want to share it with me, I would love to listen to it. And I'm going to do that for you guys today. I'm going to tell my story, and I'm going to weave a little bit of my father's story into it too, because it's a big part of who I am today. And so for the rest of this, I want you to sit back and listen to me tell my story and think about, maybe as you're hearing my perspective, as you're hearing the points that I'm making, I want you to think about, how you might tell your story. And then as soon as it's over, when there's time to do it, I want you to take a moment and really take it seriously and tell your story. Maybe you tell your spouse, maybe you tell a kid, maybe you just, like I said, pull out your phone, hit voice memo and start talking. But it's important that you communicate. If you just do it kind of to dead space, there's no stakes in it, right? When you hit record or when you talk to somebody else, there's stakes in the communication of it. So that's important. So I don't want you to miss that part. So, and I'm not always going to give you homework, but I think this is a really important thing to do, especially, as you get to this point in your life where you might be struggling with kind of where you're going. It's important to stop, look back, and see where you've been. So I was born in Woodland, California. This was 1975. My parents, Mary Jo and Joel Bryan. I was a second son. I have an older brother named Gordon. And I grew up in a college town, a place called Davis. And there's a big university there, and that was most of what was happening in town was kind of about the university. A lot of the families were there, families that had some affiliation with the university or the town itself. But I grew up at the time where there's not internet. I remember playing early video games. I had a TI 99.4A. It was my first computer. Then I had a IBM PC Junior, and I was playing King's Quest and these early computer stuff. But it was before the internet, before dial-up modems and all that kind of stuff. So it was that time where you could go outside and play with your friends on the street, and it was a little bit of that kind of old America in that way. But I grew up with some challenges in the sense that my dad was quadriplegic. And not that specifically was a challenge, but I think, so because my father was in a wheelchair, there were just certain things that he could not do. And one of them was, pick us up and wrestle with us, and some of the things that kind of men and boys, fathers and sons do that bond them and create a relationship, but also a feeling of safety or understanding of our father's strength and kind of, superiority because how strong they are, because our father is kind of our first representation of kind of the strongest person we know, right? And so my father, being in a wheelchair, quadriplegic, he literally had no strength. He had very, very limited use of his hands, no use of his legs, really mostly paralyzed from the neck down. And so I think that played a bit of a role in how we adapted as boys growing up in that family dynamic. And so, but as a second son, the youngest, I grew up kind of in the shadow of my brother, and I really struggled to find my own identity and to find out who I was. I just knew that I was, not good enough or not as talented as my brother was, not as good looking as my brother was, not as popular as my brother was. All these, seemed to just kind of always feel like I was in the shadows. Now, at 13 years old, I was really in that point in my life where it's I was in middle school. I was a little chubby. I played basketball, so I had kind of athletic, pursuits that were going on. But I I was really excited about working out. I'd watched many movies by, Stallone and Arnold Schwarzenegger and those guys. It was kind of the 80s. And so I really knew that working out was going to somehow solve something. It was going to give me, a confidence. I wanted to be strong. I wanted to look strong and all those types of things. And so, on my 13th birthday, when we had a membership at an athletic club in Davis, but I couldn't go to the weight room, not the free weight room. You were kind of not allowed to go into that room until you were 13. And so I remember that day, that morning, being 13 years old, getting to walk into the free weight room and just saying like, yes, it's my time, and I didn't know what I was doing, but I showed up. I started to figure out things, and I met some older, kids that were a year or two older than me, and they would teach me stuff. And I just started my relationship with fitness and exercise and working out and essentially bodybuilding from an early age. And so it was a big part of my adolescence and a big part of the confidence that I built through exercise and those types of things. And so other than that, I played high school basketball. I wasn't extraordinarily great. I mean, I was a starter, but I didn't get any scholarships. I was 6'4", and I was a postman. So, at 6'4", I probably should have been more of a two guard because that might have translated to college basketball, but I didn't really think about that. I just, played in high school. I was pretty good. Didn't go play college ball and went off to college and went down to San Diego, and I was just kind of decided I wanted to be a physics major. And I took a music class. I don't know why. I did, never sang my entire life. I remember thinking about like how cool those people are that sing. I could never do that. So I took a singing class in college, and I got on stage and I sang. And I think the validation of like people saying, "Oh my God, wow, you got an amazing voice," and just the fear and the anxiety and the exhilaration of doing it. Just was like the trifecta of, just set my kind of emotional or creative juices on fire. And so at 18 years old, here I was taking calculus and physics and also singing and taking music classes. And I was kind of stuck in this place where I was like, I'm in San Diego. I love surfing. I'm living in the dorms. I'm taking physics. I'm taking music. Everything's fun. I love my life, but I really made the decision that I wanted to go towards singing and music. And so I kind of went all into this kind of undergraduate singing, 2-year intensive, and then, applied and auditioned for Cal State Northridge opera program. I got in, and that was cool. So after I moved over to Cal State Northridge, and really started that journey of becoming an artist and becoming a performing artist. And so all the while I was working out, and I would train all the, the singers who, probably grew up in the church, singing in choir and in music. They never had any access to athletics and sports and things like that. And so they were looking to me to help them like figure out how to work out. And I was looking to them to help me figure out how to be a better singer and better performer and all that kind of stuff. So it was kind of this early on understanding that like, these were kind of two very different worlds. And, I got through 4 years of music, got a degree in vocal performance, minor in French, made a decision to go off to Europe before I graduated because I wanted to use that minor in French, and I wanted to go live in France for a year. So I did that and had an incredible time traveling all over the world, and especially all over Europe and West Africa. I got to go to Morocco, hitchhiked all around, just had these incredible adventures by myself, met all these amazing people. And being 6'4", 200 pounds, like you could kind of go into a country, have a little bit of French and be able to like kind of make it without, getting kidnapped or had anything bad happen to me. I mean, at least I didn't think anything bad was ever going to happen to me, and it never did. So, but that's that kind of adventurous spirit that I had early on, and that type of mindset I had was just like, go into the unknowns, seek adventure, and it was so exciting, so much fun. I learned so much. I really learned to connect and meet and befriend people of all cultures. And so, I come back from that, and I do like one more semester to graduate, and I'm like, should I pursue music or what direction should I go? And and I met an actor at my friend Andrew's, like, he was getting a master's in acting down at Irvine, and this actor was like, man, he had just gotten back from Peace Corps or something like that. Maybe his friend had just got back from Peace Corps. Anyway, he's telling me about Peace Corps and like how his friend was in like Western Africa. He was in Senegal. He had such an incredible time. And it just like, man, boom, that was it. To me, like that was going to be the next big adventure. And so, you know, I kind of just like took a huge leap, went down to the, you know, Peace Corps, the recruiter, talked to them, had an interview, boom, boom, boom. Within a couple of months, you know, I was accepted, passed all my physicals, all that kind of stuff. And, you know, I was graduating from college and jumping on a plane to Mauritania, West Africa. You know, this was 2001. So as I tell this story, I don't want to gloss over the fact that, like, I think there's a part of me that as I was running towards stuff, that I was also running away from the fear of really like sticking with something and seeing what I could do with it. So whether it was, you know, basketball or physics or music, singing, those types of things, like, you know, sometimes subconsciously my decision to make the next best, you know, adventure was also a decision to not pursue the thing that I was probably afraid of. But anyway, so I go to Africa. I'm sent to this village called Jajibine. It's about 2,500 people in the like southeastern part of Mauritania, which is kind of close to the Senegal River, Mali, Senegal, Mauritania. They're all kind of share a border. And this community just takes me in and really changes my mindset on so many things. Because at that point, you know, I was very me focused. I was very centered on like my journey, my experience, my, you know, me. And even going to Peace Corps, I mean, it wasn't really an altruistic decision. It was more of an adventure because I wanted to experience something cool for me, right? And then I do this Peace Corps experience, and in, you know, being with this village for 2 years, they really, you know, I don't know if they did anything or I did anything. It was just kind of I fell in love with supporting this community and being a part of the community, and just wanted to help them find a better way to do things. And it just reversed, kind of, I think, engineered the way my brain was wired. And it became much more about helping other people, coaching. I was a teacher there, so teaching the kids and just being a part of making people's lives better. So that was such a turning point for me in my life. And, you know, mid-20s, you know, I'm just, you know, thousands of miles away from all that I know. You know, 9/11 had just happened. All these things were on satellite phones, calling Peace Corps headquarters every week to let them know, hey, everything's okay. No problems here in Jajibine, because everyone's Muslim in Mauritania. And so I think they were just concerned that, you know, that we'd be unsafe. That was never an issue for me. My community just looked out for me the entire time I was there. And so anyway, that experience really catapulted my life in the direction I went in my life. And so coming back from Peace Corps 2 years later, I did some various things, did more, you know, working with kids and things like that, and then kind of made my way to New York City to pursue acting and really the art of storytelling. And so being in New York City, you know, doing an acting studio, I was able to write a one-person show about my Peace Corps experience and perform it, not just in New York City, but in Austin and California, throughout the country. And it was such a cathartic way of really sharing my experience, sharing my story that and what I learned from being with this community in West Africa for so long. And so that was just a really kind of full circle moment for me, where I was able to kind of take my life, share it with others, make that connection, and really, like, you know, find a unique, creative way to make that impact on other people. And so that's that in some way led me to Austin, because coming to Austin from doing that show, I met my wife. I met Bryan, and, you know, she was actually introduced to me by a lady on the plane who, you know, husband was from Africa, and we were just kind of talking about all the things that we were up to. And she was like, oh my gosh, you've got to meet my friend Val. So she like got my number, made it all happen. And all of a sudden we were meeting in the airport a few days later, falling in love, long distance dating until I finished my acting program in New York and then moved to Austin. And that was 16 years ago. And Val and I have been married 16 years. So such a big piece of this story is why I ended up in Austin, meeting Val and making the decision to like start my life here in Austin with her. And of course, now we have a 9-year-old son named Jack. And, and all those things kind of tie together to kind of put me where I'm at today. And the last piece of all that is the fact that, when I came to Austin, I really wanted to get back into, training and helping people get healthy through fitness. And that became kind of the other piece that I'd kind of left behind when I went to Africa and when I went to New York City. I was focusing on the artistic and the adventurous side, but that fitness piece really came full circle when it came to Austin. And, that became kind of the through line, like working with people of all ages, helping them get healthier, doing boot camps, doing personal training, online coaching, all those types of things. And it's just been such a perfect kind of connection of all these pieces of my life that means so much to me, and how I can then help other people improve their lives and really get through hard times and become better by struggling in the gym or struggling with fitness, so that they can ultimately change their life, not just from a physical standpoint, but from a mental standpoint. And I had a trainer when I was in high school, and I used to go over to his house. His name's Gary Mann. And he has all these workout, pieces of equipment in his front yard. They were all rusty, but he had maybe 10, 15 athletes, usually athletes there. And he said, working out is a mental exercise done physically. And that always resonated with me. It's like the mental challenges that we put ourselves through by working out, pushing ourselves beyond what we feel we're comfortable with, and how that affects, yes, our physical health, but also our mental strength, self-confidence, and all of the things that like revolve around that. And so, 48 years old, here I am in Austin with my wife and 9-year-old son, Jack. And it's just been such an incredible, especially the last 5 years, and really diving as deep as I can on the relationships, helping people. And the last piece of this story is about my father. So my father was born in 1937. He's this really, athletic, smart kid, grew up with a dad who was in the Foreign Service. Now, they ended up in the Philippines in 1950, after World War II and that kind of stuff. They were over there working for the State Department. My father ended up sitting next to a boy in the bus on the way to a track meet who happened to have polio, and he didn't know. And a few days later, my father got up to use the restroom and fell to the floor when he was 12 years old, and he never walked again. And so, of course, I didn't know him then when he was 12, but, his whole adult life from 12 years old on, he was a quadriplegic in a wheelchair, and that had, of course, incredible impact on him and how he led his life. But what he did to become who he was when I was born is such an incredible part of his story, and it becomes a part of my story because it really connects me to like the strongest man I've ever met. And I don't mean that by muscles. That has nothing to do with how much they bench or deadlift or squat. My dad, what he persevered through, what he, did when there were no handicap entrances into buildings, when there were no elevators, when there were no ramps onto curbs. He was the first person to go to UC Riverside in a wheelchair, get a degree, and then they hired him to help other handicapped people get access so that they could also come to Riverside. Not just people in wheelchairs, but people that are blind, deaf, had various different disabilities. And he and a team of people helped figure out how to create an environment that would allow them to seek an education and be successful. So he was brought to UC Davis, to do the same thing there. And that's why we ended up in Davis, California. So when I knew my father, He was at the tail end of his career as a director for the Disabled Student Services at UC Davis, and he really helped the entire Disabled Student Services movement. Literally, the ADA Act that George Bush Sr. signed was truly based on what was happening at the UC system. UC Davis, UC Berkeley with Ed Roberts, who's kind of the Martin Luther King of, when people talk about the Disabled Student Services movement, they talk about Ed Roberts at Berkeley. And Joel and Ed and others were at the forefront of, figuring out how to do it, how to create the laws and the regulations that would allow people, of all disabilities to be able to, have a healthy, able-bodied life by creating access and opportunities for them. So all that's to say, that's a part of me too, and if I think about my role, in this world and where I'm called to help, and, it's different from my dad, but I'm definitely in a place where I want to make sure that my impact is truly felt, and the people that I can help and support and guide are going to feel much more able, the course of this chapter of your life. And I'm, talking about people in their 40s or 60s. Like, how can we get through this period and not just survive, but thrive and really set the tone for the rest of our life? Because we are at that time where if you're 45 or 50, the trajectory of your life, if you're healthy and you don't lose all your mobility and don't fall and break your hip or don't get morbidly obese and have diabetes, if you avoid those major issues of getting old, there is no reason you couldn't live to be 90, 95, 100 years old or more. And so we are at a very important time in this world, really, because the science, the understanding, the awareness of what we can do actively right now to slow down and mitigate the aging process is absolutely unlike any other time in history. And we're learning so much every single year. I've heard a quote from, Dr. David Sinclair. He talks about every 10 years, science kind of learns how to keep people alive 2 more years. So if you're 45, think about 55, 65, 75, 85, 40 years from now, that's 8 to 10 years of life that we've probably at this point figured out how to increase your lifespan. And obviously there's other ways that people die, but for the most part, it's really about keeping yourself healthy, keeping your body from deteriorating, keeping yourself from losing muscle, losing mobility, balance, obviously cognitive function, not falling into dementia, not getting neurological diseases and things like that. If we can do those things, we might be only halfway through our life. At 48 years old, there's no reason why I can't live a great life all the way to 96 and beyond. And so thinking that way, if I only live half my life, man, what's coming up? How can I make it amazing? How can I be the best father, the best husband, the best leader in this community? And so I think about those things all the time, and I want to make sure that you guys start to get the tools to make sure that you feel that same way, and we build momentum for the future. Not just that kind of egotistical momentum of feeling like, ooh, I'm strong, I look good, I look good naked, great, that's fantastic. You might get some looks because of that, but deeper than that, like being strong for what? For my son, for my wife, for my community. Living a long time for what? So that I can make an impact and keep making an impact into my 70s, 80s, and beyond. Right? But it starts now. It starts with discipline. It starts with habits. It starts with mindset. It starts with confidence. It starts with getting to the gym or getting out there and working out, not just running, not just riding a bike, not just doing cardio. That's, for a lot of us, those things they feel good, and I know that's important. But like lifting weights, keeping and building mobility, making sure that you have the flexibility and mobility to move your body in all directions. Those types of things are going to be key to making sure you have the best possible second half of your life. And let's make this half the best half. The whole goal for today was telling my story because I want you to tell your story. So pull out that phone, hit the record button if you want to do it that way, or just say, talk to your spouse or your kid or somebody who will listen, who loves you enough to want to hear 30 minutes of you talk about your life. But hit record or give somebody the opportunity to listen to you tell your story, and try to hit those big moments, and try to see the arc of your life and where it brings you to this day right now. And let's start from there then, and we'll move forward on the next one. So here's how it's going to work. Each week I have a different theme. We'll do solo casts every other week, and then I'm going to do interviews with men in their 40s and 50s, kind of talking about what they're doing, CEOs, athletes, people in various different sectors who are kind of in the same phase of their life as we are, and what they've learned, what they're doing, some hacks, some habits, some mindset concepts that they're using or they understand that could help you, myself, get better and better. So that's where we're at. Hey, I really appreciate you listening to this. If you know a couple more people who are kind of in this phase of their lives that probably need to listen to this, share it. Let's get the word out there, and let's help guys like us take that next step. All right, as I wrap up this first podcast, go ahead, if you'd like to get a weekly workout plan from me, go ahead and just email me at barton@bartonguybryan.com. I will send you a formulated weekly workout plan that you can utilize if you're already going to the gym. It's got some great concepts on how to split your workout to really hit all the body parts, and give you lots of options based on what kind of equipment you have and that kind of thing. That's free. That's something I give out just to help people kind of maybe steer you in a new direction or reinforce what you're already doing. Hey, if you're doing a lot of the right things, it's always good to know what you're doing is working, because that's what I would recommend. So you just shoot me an email. I will send you that PDF. It's really easy. You can read through it. It's got a lot of great content on it. And also, if you're interested in setting up a 30-minute discovery call with me, I would love to chat with you about possibly coaching and what that looks like and kind of how that works. I do 3-month coaching programs, which include fitness, nutrition, mindset, all those types of things. So you can find out more about that by sending me an email too. All right. Thanks again for listening to the Mindset Forge podcast.